provosts, deans, faculty, the last president of AUB, my immediate successor, staff, students, alumni, and friends of AUB. Welcome to the 150th anniversary of the university. Saturday, December 3rd, 2 days ago, marked the 150th year to the day since our university first opened its door to its students. It's an extraordinary thought that everything we see around us today started with a small number of faculty and students meeting in rented rooms here in Beirut a century and a half ago. L.P. Hartley's 1953 masterpiece, The Go-Between, reminds us in its opening sentence that the past is a foreign country, they do things differently there. Indeed, the Syrian Protestant College, the name on which AUB first emerged, was a very different institution to what we have here today. Founded by American evangelical missionaries, its purpose was to spread the gospel. The building we are sitting in today looks like a church because it was one once. A college chapel, the setting for daily Christian worship, mandatory for all students, regardless of their faith or absence of faith. The founding fathers, who we honor today and annually with this ceremony, failed to achieve their pious, sincerely held objective to convert the people of Lebanon to their faith, except for a few of us, of course. But they did plant the seeds for the equally sincere realization among their successors that the mission of service to humanity would be better advanced by providing a firmly secular education of the highest quality. The last decades of the 19th century and the first decades of the 20th century were the time that the Syrian Protestant College / AUB went from Presbyterian proselytization to a different kind of evangelizing. And to use a Roman Catholic word in a secular context that it was never coined for, to the inculturation of secular, democratic, liberal values by embedding an aspiration for a better tomorrow through leading the development of Arab society, by teaching science, medicine, the arts, and the humanities. They succeeded, frankly, beyond their wildest expectations. Leaders trained at the American University of Beirut were indeed faithful secular Democrats, servants of their people throughout the Arab world and beyond. It's to that purpose, again, that now more than ever, in a season of naked nativism and prejudice, that we again turn to our leadership role in the Arab world and beyond. Because it is contingent upon us to look forward so that we can help with our stated goal to remove the obstacles that prevent the best and brightest in our society and other societies from fulfilling their full potential. Our goal is to help lead towards the emergence of a more educated, engaged, and pluralistic society, and to be unapologetic about that mission. Many of you, most of you I hope, will have been involved in some form or the other in the astounding celebrations of AUB's sesquicentennial this year. It's been a magnificent effort in which we've had ample opportunity to reflect on this university's impact on Lebanon and the Arab world. We've celebrated our most illustrious alumni, our history makers, as well as the many who are not household names, but who have still made meaningful impact in their own milieus. We've held academic symposia, staged important cultural and sporting events, and many, many other inclusive social and societal occasions. This attention to celebration, however, was not intended solely for narcissistic self-examination. On the contrary, we've treated 2016 as an inflection point, a point in our long and distinguished history when we can look ahead to devise how we ensure that this university can remain relevant and sustainable intellectually, ethically, economically, socially, environmentally sustainable. Where's Ahmad Al-Hajj, who lectured the board on sustainability? Yes, sustainable. For future years, even decades, even through to our bicentennial and well beyond. So we've delved back into our past in order to determine our future. They say that if you know
If you want to know where you're going, you have to know who you are and where you've been. So our goal is nothing less than to equip the citizens of tomorrow with the means and the purpose to effect a better world. We'll establish the most effective and powerful platform we can to develop and mentor the next generation of citizen leaders, and we can do that. We can do that by modeling a better, fairer, freer, and more ethical and more democratic workplace here at AUB. By doing so, we will continue to honor and celebrate the founders of our college, who took that first far-sighted and transformative step 150 years ago to create this singular institution. We are very fortunate today to have the perfect Founders Day speaker on this very special occasion. Dr. Troutt Powell, Associate Dean for Graduate Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. I'll speak a little bit more about why Dr. Troutt Powell is such an ideal Founders Day speaker, but she's a distinguished historian of the modern Middle East whose most recent book is Tell This in My Memory, Stories of Enslavement in Egypt, Sudan, and the Late Ottoman Empire, which was published by Stanford University Press in 2012. She'll be talking to us today about the critical role of liberal arts education and its role in creating not only well-rounded citizens, but servant leaders. Her address, which I'm looking forward to hearing, I didn't take the temptation of reading the speech in advance, is appropriately entitled The Nahda, Slavery and the Liberal Arts. I want to sincerely thank you, Dr. Troutt Powell, for being here on this special occasion. Thank you. I'm now going to turn to the part where we recognize the single most valuable group of citizens in this university. It's not the administration. I think we can get the faculty consensus on that. It's never the administration. Right, Peter? It's not the staff, as hard as they work and as great as they are, and we have an extraordinary staff. It's not even the faculty who contribute knowledge and sweat equity every day. It's the students. The university was created for the students. And I'm going to announce the winners of the Founders Day Essay Prize. The third prize is awarded to Ms. Renwa Mjais from the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Could Ms. Mjais please join me? So it's my pleasure and privilege to give you the certificate for your wonderful essay, as well as a copy of the book that our Dean of Arts and Sciences helped lead. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Essay is wonderful. The second prize is awarded to Mr. Muhammad al-Shamma'a, also from the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Also a wonderful essay. And as the tradition holds, our first prize is awarded to Monsieur Maximilien Montet from the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. This is new to me. I hear French spoken on campus, which is wonderful. Maximilien is actually a citizen of France. He won the first place award, and he is going to go on stage and to read his essay. And then we will award him his certificate. After you, Maximilien.
So, my essay is entitled Students Who Are Curious. It has been over a century since Howard Bliss stood before the student body of AUB and delivered his hopes for the future of education. The crowd he addressed and the world that received him in 1911 was infinitely different from today. And yet, similarities can still be drawn between these ages. In fact, if he were to give his speech today, there would be very little need for redaction, and that is a saddening fact. When Howard Bliss spoke, he knew, just as I do, that he was addressing the future and all of its potential. What he did not know, something that I am now a witness and a culprit to, is that most students do not enter college to become doctors who were women, teachers who were men, or to follow a profession held by a complete human. The focus back then and today has remained on the profession and the degree. College has successfully become an institution of closed-mindedness that actively encourages repressing passions. Think about it. Electives in humanities are not seen as a chance to broaden horizons, but rather as a chore, and obligatory courses that deviate from the description of the degree are seen as bothersome. This way of thinking is almost an insult to the immense capabilities of the students here today and to the full untapped potential of humankind. By reducing the paths we could take, we have stopped nurturing our curiosity. We have stepped so far from the ideal of the Renaissance man that we are content with ourselves and our minuscule knowledge base. Our world is one with many problems, and solving them will require the curiosity to dive into and combine the thought processes of all sorts of fields in order to create the complete human who can change the world. Now, Gustave Lançon said it best when describing Voltaire. He said, in a world of bureaucrats, engineers, and producers, Voltaire is a necessary philosopher. The exact same phrase can be applied here. In a world of doctors, plastic surgeons, and civil engineers, curiosity is the necessary agitator. The world we have today was not built on the ideas of one or even two fields. It was the beautiful, accidental, and sometimes even weird synthesis of completely unrelated schools of thought. It was the brainchild of curious, fertile minds. It is those kinds of minds that bring about drastic and lasting changes, because it takes that kind of person to bring about change. If you are unable to step out of your comfort zone to learn about something that fascinates you just because others are telling you things like, there's no money there, it's not a safe career, or I'll disown you, then stay where you are. Enjoy the comfort of your little mind garden where nothing interesting ever grows. In the meantime, there are engineers learning about Polynesian people's history. They might stumble on ancient navigation methods. There are business majors diving into classical music. They might discover how songs from centuries ago still have such powerful effects on us and become better marketers. There are also doctors spending their nights learning about archaeology. To be honest, I have no idea how they could use that knowledge in their field. But it doesn't matter. We do not need to know ahead of time where this or that path will lead us, because knowledge is not your typical road. Where we end up does not depend on the bends and turns we took, but rather how many paths we've set foot upon. And the greater that number, the closer it leads us to our goals. A bit earlier, I mentioned something called the Renaissance man. It could be argued that those born during that period were leaps and bounds ahead of us in intelligence. After all, it turned out the likes of Da Vinci, Machiavelli, Galileo, all great artists and scientists. That time period had a much more holistic approach to education. Back then, an educated person was one who spoke several languages, could write literature, play an instrument, paint, draw, and hold a conversation in a few fields of science. These abilities could only be developed through a universal education coupled with a universal curiosity. That is where the word university comes from. Initially, universities served the purpose of helping students build a strong and broad foundation, after which they might specialize. Maybe it's because of the times we live in, but universities today do not have that liberty. The closest being freshman year, the pre-med program, and a liberal arts education. Now, this is not meant to be a sermon or a critique of your educational choices. That would be going against the greatest progress we've had since 1911, giving back to people the freedom of choice. No, this is meant as a sign to reflect, to think forward to the change you want to leave behind you. Because at this very moment, you have an opportunity that is unheard of. The unique chance to jump headfirst into the unknown with very little lasting consequences and unlimited potential upside. Our Bliss did not just want professions held by men and women. He wanted students who were not afraid, students who wanted to learn, students who questioned everything and sought out the answers. He wanted students who were curious. Thank you.
That was magnificent, Maximilien.
Thank you very much.
You are a certified liberal arts troublemaker. No, no, it's okay. Thank you. Bravo. Bravo to all three of you. I would like to, before the choir sings, acknowledge and thank the committee that reviewed all the essays, composed of 2 humanists and an engineer. So I'd like to thank the engineer, Nadine Mokadi, thank you, John Malloy, and Ira Allen. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the wonderful music. It's my privilege and my pleasure to introduce Eve M. Troutt Powell, who is the Christopher H. Brown Distinguished Professor of History at the University of Pennsylvania and is currently the School of Arts and Sciences Associate Dean for Graduate Studies. The School of Arts and Sciences, we know someone who worked there, our COO, oversees the school's doctoral programs, which take place in 33 different graduate groups and enroll 1,400 different students. That's our aspiration one day. Professor Troutt Powell is a distinguished historian of the modern Middle East, with a special interest in the region's relationship, as I mentioned, with Africa. She's a specialist on the modern Middle East and its history of slavery in the Nile Valley and in the Ottoman Empire. As a cultural historian, she's particularly valuable in that she emphasizes the exploration of literature and film in her courses. She's the author of A Different Shade of Colonialism, Egypt, Great Britain and the Mastery of the Sudan, published by the University of California in 2003, and the co-editor with John Hunwig of The African Diaspora in the Mediterranean Lands of Islam in the Princeton series on the Middle East. Her most recent book, as I mentioned, is Tell This in My Memory, Stories of Enslavement in Egypt, Sudan, and the Late Ottoman Empire, which was published by Stanford University Press. Dr. Troutt Powell received her Bachelor's of Art, her Master's of Art, and her PhD from Harvard University. We're very fortunate that she and our Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences were friends and contemporaries during their graduate studies, so we had an in to entice Dr. Powell to come here. Prior to coming to Penn, she taught for 10 years at the University of Georgia, another connection. She's received fellowships from the American Research Center in Egypt and the Social Science Research Council. And she's been a fellow for the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton and at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. In 2003, she received arguably the highest award in the humanities, short of the Nobel Prize, which is the prestigious Macarthur Fellowship as a historian focusing on the role of race in the social and cultural evolution of Egyptian identity in modern Islamic society. It's really the top award given to young scholars in the humanities. Commonly referred to as the Genius Award, the Macarthur Fellowship comes with a $500,000 no strings attached grant. I want to repeat that for those of us who've never had a no strings attached grant. Right, Mr. EVP? A $500,000 no strings attached grant. It's designed to emphasize the importance of the creative individual in society. Fellows are selected for the originality and creativity of their work and the potential to do more in the future. In my humble, non-humanist view, Dr. Troutt Powell is an exemplar of this creativity and potential to do more. She's now working on a book about the visual culture of slavery in the Middle East, which will explore the paintings and photography about African and Circassian slavery in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In my view, we could not have found a more appropriate, apt, or distinguished scholar for our 150th anniversary celebration. Dr. Powell, welcome, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for trying to help get the images up. I was hoping to show you the faces of the people I'm talking about, so I will just have to orally convey their personalities to you. But let me just begin by saying thank you all so much for coming. I am totally delighted to have been invited. I'm so grateful to President Hodi to offer this honor to speak on the 150th anniversary of the founding of the American University in Beirut, that you would honor me with such a task. As a historian, to give some perspective on the significance and the power of the liberal arts at this moment in AUB's history is, I wrote here, almost overwhelming. It's quite overwhelming. When I was a young scholar in the late 1980s and 1990s, it was much more difficult to conduct research in or even visit Beirut as an American. I learned about Beirut, I learned about Beirut from its beautiful diaspora, like my dear friend from graduate school, Dean Nadia Sheikh, and from the many who came to Cairo in 1984, to the American University in Cairo, can I call that a sister school, AUC?
It is a
that
sister
okay?
school.
Okay, good. Where I landed my first job after graduating from college, or more of the Beirut diaspora and other parts of Lebanon who settled in Cairo and Alexandria by the early 1990s when I was doing the research for my dissertation. I have yearned to be in this place for over half of my life, and I thank you again for this chance and this inclusion of me in AUB's formidable 150-year-old history. Now, I know that the 3 students who won the prizes, and congratulations to you all, have done this with more understanding and eloquence than I can, and certainly we heard that from Maximilien Monte's speech. I do want to begin my talk today as well with the words of AUB's second president, Howard Bliss, who, as you know, said in 1911 that the purpose of the college is not to produce singly or chiefly men who are doctors, men who are pharmacists, men who are merchants, men who are preachers, teachers, lawyers, editors, statesmen, but it is the purpose of the college to produce doctors who are men, pharmacists who are men, merchants who are men, preachers who are teachers, lawyers, editors, statesmen who are men. And by 1911, he could refer to a long line of AUB graduates, and I will get to the women soon, who had indeed proven themselves to be lawyers, doctors, and writers who were men, preachers, scholars, and editors who were men. So one of these men who has influenced over a century of scholarship is the legendary Georgi Zaidan, who lived from 1861 to 1914, and I was going to show you a picture of Georgi Zaidan. As a scholar of the Nahda, especially in Egypt, I have read dozens of articles from Al-Muqtattaf, which he co-edited, and of course Al-Hilal, the journal that he edited, where Georgi Zaidan, both as co-editor, editor, and writer, explored to the full the spectrum of the liberal arts. From scientific discoveries to ethnographic studies and early anthropology to history and creative writing, Georgi Zaidan invested his belief that this kind of education and the means of disseminating and producing these types of knowledge would create generations wiser than his own. Georgi Zaidan employed the liberal arts to situate himself and his contemporaries in history, hoping that by his research and his writings, he would also teach his contemporaries about their own history, particularly as Arabs. Another 19th century Renaissance man, Rajid al-Nahda, was Georgi Zaidan's older Egyptian counterpart, Ali Mubarak Pasha. And I was going to show you his picture as well with the book about which I'm going to talk. Born in 1823, Ali Mubarak eventually worked his way through the engineering school. Thank you.
That's real.
Thank you. Ali Mubarak always gets me choked up. Sorry. Worked his way through engineering school and through 2 years in France as a member of an official delegation sent by Muhammad Ali Pasha, the ruler of Egypt, to glean the secrets of science from French schools. And he worked his way up to become the first native-born Egyptian to achieve very high rank in the decades of the Khadivs, Ismail, Tawfiq, and Abbas Hilmi. But it is in his 20-volume historical topography, Al-Khittat al-Tawfiqiyya al-Jadida, that he reveals how important it was for him as a child to attend what was then the new secular school in Asr al-Aini. He had failed repeatedly at all other schooling in his early life, and he has wonderful descriptions of being beaten by this teacher and being beaten by that teacher because he was just so unable to learn things in the way they had, in the system they had set up. It was not until, in fact, he met Anbar Effendi, a mid-ranking official in the service of the Khedive, who was a former Ethiopian slave, the son of a slave woman who had been one of the first midwives trained at the historical hospital of Asr al-Aini. And when Ali Mubarak heard Anbar Effendi's beautiful classical Arabic, that he was so impressed and that he knew and begged to be admitted into this secular school. And I'm just going to move off script for a minute. In Al-Khittat al-Tawfiqiyya al-Jadida, he has this wonderful description of seeing this black, he called him Abid, slave, having all these Ottoman officials and Egyptian officials kiss his hand and kiss his ring. And he has this conversation with his father in which he said, well, how could this abid, how could this slave get to this point? And how does he have this Arabic? And where does he come from? And could he be Circassian? This is one of the things that is asked. And he and his father just sit there scratching their heads until he actually goes and asks Anbar Effendi what his background was. And he finds out, and then he is hired by him, and it all went up from there. So Ali Mubarak, for the rest of his life, combined his scientific and technological knowledge of draftsmanship and engineering with his profound sense of history and literature. He wrote Al-Khitat while he was also the Minister of Public Works in Egypt. And in these 20 volumes, he hoped to ensure that Egyptians understood the history of the country around them and the meaning and the significance of important geographical and architectural sites, even though his mission as minister was to tear down most of these sites and build new structures all across Egypt, but particularly in Cairo. Now, what I have always found fascinating in both Georgi Zaidan and Ali Mubarak Pasha was their interest in slavery as a reality of their times and as a literary trope. Georgi Zaidan's first historical novel, published in 1891, El Mamluk El Sharid, or The Fleeing Mamluk, tells a tale of exile and a complicated enslavement of both black and white characters. Most notable to me was the image of the Sudanese slave to the elite princess, whose language is as elegant as his ugliness is purported to be. Zaidan's second historical novel, Asir al-Mutamahdi, or The Prisoner of the False Mahdi, tells the story of a prisoner of the Sudanese Mahdi, and he wrote this when actual Egyptian personages were still being held by the forces of this long Sudanese rebellion. Slaves are everywhere in this book, as is the idea that the wrong people are being enslaved by a false prophet. For Ali Mubarak, Mamluks, who represent for him white slaves, built an older medieval Cairo, even ruled it. African slaves performed for their owners throughout the work, sometimes even attaining greatness, like Anbar Effendi. Ali Mubarak Pasha admits to buying and selling slaves repeatedly throughout the book, sometimes, though, as if this institution is as fragile and time-limited as the classic but worn-down buildings he was commissioned to tear down. My next example of a scholar and intellectual, a specialist in the liberal arts of languages, was perhaps unknown to Georgi Zaidan or to Ali Mubarak, although he lived and taught in Cairo during years in which both of our authors were spreading their influential wings. This is a man named Father Daniel Surur Farim Deng. Born a year or two before Georgi Zaidan in what is now South Sudan, the little boy, Farim Deng, was kidnapped at the age of 11 or 12 and sold into slavery. He was brought as a slave to Al Ubaid in the Sudan, and where he remained in captivity for 2 years until he escaped into the refuge of the Kamboni missionary compound, named for Father Daniele Kamboni, who would protect Farim Deng and guide him through his catechism, his baptism, and his seminary training, where he was named after his protector, and that's why he's called Daniel. His name actually represents the travels and the travails that he went through. Farim Deng is his given name from his father, and then Surur is the Arabic slave name that he was given by those who bought him and owned him, and then Daniele becomes his Catholic name, his baptized name, and then of course he went through seminary and earned the title of father. Daniel showed a brilliance for language acquisition. He learned Arabic in Cairo and was then sent to Rome, where he became fluent in Italian. Through his many lectures in Europe about the plight of African slaves, it appears he also earned proficiency in German. So Father Daniel Surur Farim Deng used this gift for languages to write passionate and sophisticated articles about the travails of black slaves in Africa and his beautiful memorie or memoir. He also taught languages in Cairo, first at the Cathedral of St. Joseph in Zamalek, and later, because of his ill health, he had terrible asthma, which eventually killed him, in Helwan. He was deeply valued by the Kamboni missionaries, who exist to this day and who have an archive dedicated in his name in Rome, because he represented something rare and powerful in his time, an eloquent and multilingual former slave who spoke against a universal racism that held back black people. The skills he learned in the study of foreign languages enabled him to be heard by Egyptians, by Sudanese, and by Europeans, to be heard as a man, and as I imagine Howard Bliss would think, deserving of respect. And now for the women, for whom in the late 19th century and the early 20th century societies in which the men I have discussed lived, a liberal arts education required a father or brother devoted to reforming the status of women. Halide Adib Adivar was born in 1884, the first Ottoman girl to go to the American College for Girls, and one of the first to write novels describing late Ottoman life and also what life was like for Ottoman women. She was an activist before and after World War I, a nationalist leader as the Ottoman Empire became the Turkish Republic, and in exile when she rebelled against Ataturk's leadership. Well, not pictured here, but would have been pictured here as well, is Hoda Sha'arawi, Halide's age mate. Born in Egypt in 1881, Hoda was an elite young woman, like Halide, who also became an activist in the 1919 revolution against the British occupation. Not a novelist like Halide, an even more effective politician who founded the women's rights movement in the country of Egypt, but fought to keep women's issues and concerns in the minds of the members of Egypt's first parliament and subsequent governments. Both women wrote in their memoirs about the slaves who raised them and who were raised by them and with them. Halide had powerful memories of her Ethiopian slave, Resha, whom she freed once she had married and whose beauty and intelligence she greatly admired. Hoda was less conflicted about slavery, although also and often in her memoirs remembering her slaves or the slaves in her household with kindness. But her close attachment to slavery and her outspoken criticism of Egyptian officials willing to cede the Sudan to Great Britain provoked harsh caricatures, as we are not seeing right now, so I'm going to describe it. From a 1926 edition of El Kashkul, or the Notebook, which was a nationalist and satirical journal published in Egypt, I was going to show you a picture. The caricatures were often incredible watercolors, and the books were each page was about this big. And the caricature that I wanted to show you all is of Hoda, quite recognizable. She had her veil on, beautifully dressed, there's definitely fur. And next to her is a figure with a tarbush who would be recognized by Egyptian readers at the time as a eunuch or a black eunuch. Only the most elite households in Egypt were able to afford black eunuchs who were usually Sudanese slaves who rose to very high levels of authority within very elite and royal households. So she is pictured standing next to this Aga, as they were known, and she is saying to him in the caption, he's saying, well, what's the problem with these men in parliament? And she's saying, well, you are more of a man than they are. And of course, the joke would have been that he was a castrato, and so, it was a satirical journal. But the irony here is that this represents Said Aga, the eunuch who raised her and her brother after the death of their father. In her memoirs, this is the man who refused to let her learn proper classical Arabic, asking humorlessly whether she would ever need it because she wasn't going to be a lawyer or a doctor. It's the liberal arts that made Hoda Sha'arawi into something completely new. So how did liberal arts save the people that I'm talking about? All of the people I have discussed here used their education to persuade and to teach, while often leading nationalist movements, women's movements, or abolitionist movements. Many of them also faced discrimination or prejudice as well. Georgi Zayden, of course, fled Ottoman repression in Mount Lebanon, but also faced discrimination in Egypt. He took this on with clear eyes and with his pen, his printing press, and his imagination. Ali Mubarak Pasha found himself in liberal arts again and again as a novelist and encyclopedist while working as the top civil engineer in the land. Father Daniel Surur Farimdeng faced more outright racism than I could ever imagine, and yet used his skills to write himself into humanity. Halide Adib Adivar used her novels to fight the discrimination she saw in polygamy in the Ottoman Empire, and Hoda employed her skills into becoming a master politician, but also as multilingual as Father Daniel was, and invested heavily in the education of young Egyptian women. What do they teach us? That the liberal arts remind us of what is timeless. Our connections to each other are most strongly expressed in prose and in poetry, in music and in dance, in the social sciences of how we relate to each other, and in the natural sciences of discovery and healing. These are the arts and tools which make, if I may paraphrase Howard Bliss, doctors, pharmacists, merchants, preachers, teachers, lawyers, editors, statespeople, poets who are human and can find the humanity in others. Thank you very much.
That was amazing. I think if we could all stand for the singing of the Alma Mater.